everyone, Salma from Nordcraft here, and today I'm joined by Andreas from Nordcraft, and we're going to be talking about a blog post he has written recently titled "Stop Saying Democratize When You Mean Dumb Down." I've got some spicy questions for you today, Andreas. I hope you don't mind. And how are you doing? First of all, we've got to get that out of the way.
I'm doing very well. I'm having a good day. We're sort of in the summer holiday period, so kids are around the house everywhere. Hopefully they won't run into the office, but we'll see what happens.
Well, we can edit that out, can't we? Even though you know that you don't like to edit parts of me out, so maybe we'll see how you feel.
Exactly.
Anyway, I'm going to go straight into my questions that I have planned very meticulously. Number one, you say in the blog post, ever noticed how every new tech tool promises to democratize something? Canva has seen impressive growth by offering a simpler graphic design tool. No-code tools like Retool are democratizing software development. V.io is democratizing video editing, and AI is supposedly democratizing everything. You also say, is making our tools simpler really a kind of liberation or a new form of control? End quote. So my first question is, there's often talk in the tech industry about how we can't separate tech from politics and that tech is political. And this comes through really clearly in the post using words such as democratize and oppression. So I want to hear your thoughts on that to kick us off. Is tech inherently political?
That's a good question. I haven't seen. I wasn't allowed to see these first. So I think everything is politics. I don't think there are exceptions to that. I think politics are about values, and in the end, everything is about values. So I don't think you can really separate. Like, there are things where you don't have to bring politics into everything, but you know, if you squint enough, I suppose everything is political to some extent. Or at least everything relates back to your core values, right? I don't know that there's a need to use that kind of language. I don't think democratizing is a good word to use here. Like, I specifically talk about in the article because I think it's well, first of all, it's used to sort of drive extra hype towards an idea, right? You want to, we're battling this big injustice by democratizing things. And at the same time, it's actually used to mean the exact opposite of what democracy normally means, right?
It's interesting you bring that up because I looked up some definitions of democracy, right? So in the post, you say that going from difficult but free to simple but controlled by a single company is almost the exact opposite of what the word democratization means. But democracy means a few things. The most relevant definition of democracy that I found in this context, it's number 3 definition in the dictionary definition, but it's the practice or principles of social equality. And in the context of using technology and tools to achieve things, giving as many people as possible this opportunity is a good thing in the end, right? Like, even if there may be trade-offs, such as one company controlling each tool, democratizing in that context of giving everybody the chance to do something, isn't that a good thing?
Well, I think there's a reason why it was number 3 on the definition list. It's not the best one, is it? I think democracy is somewhat about social equality, but it's not the primary thing, right? It's not about everyone being equal in everything that they do. It's about having the equal opportunities, right? I think the problem what I dislike about using democracy for what is simply simplifying software tools is that it was equal before. The only difference was how much effort you put into it. Like, if you wanted to be a great programmer, you can learn to be a great programmer. It takes effort, right? What simplified tools do is that you can get further without too much effort. Like, it creates a baseline. Everybody is now this good without really investing time in it. And if you want to be better, you still have to invest time in it, right? I don't know that creating a shared baseline is democratizing in terms of, like, how good are you at graphic design, right? So maybe that's where the sort of analogy of politics sort of stops, because, like, we're not creating social equality here by making people better at editing photos or videos, right? That's not what's happening.
But on the Nordcraft for Web Designers page on nordcraft.com, The headline says, "Stop drawing and start building. Nordcraft gives you a seat at the table, enabling you to implement your designs and collaborate as an equal with software engineers." So by that definition, and my number 3 definition of democracy, isn't Nordcraft democratizing building apps and websites if you're a designer?
No, I don't think it's democratized in that sense. I think designers and developers are inherently equal. I think there are two sides that are very important to building apps. I think, unfortunately, we haven't quite seen that as much recently. I think most product teams, there's an implicit ranking where people listen just a little bit more to the engineers than they do the designers. Designers tend to be a little bit put over into the tools. They're like Figma, they'll draw a UI, but they maybe aren't really consulted about what are we actually building and the sort of overall design decisions. Nordcraft itself is built around the idea that developers and designers work in the same tool, thereby somewhat putting them on the same level. But the organization still has to do that. Like, the tool just enables that workflow. You still have to do it as a team, right? The only thing is Nordcraft doesn't get in the way of that. It allows you to do it. But I mean, however you structure, who you listen to most in your team is still up to you. Right? It's just an enabler.
So in that sense, are you saying that in the current way we're working, designers are oppressed? Because in the blog post, you talk about how democratizing software means that what came before was a form of oppression. Quote, "Something that was being kept from a class of people, but now finally they can access it." And if you're talking about bringing designers in to that situation as equals, surely, now they are no longer oppressed, so they are democratized.
I think they're undervalued in the current way we're working. I think design in many ways have been, like, product designers have been reduced to UI UX designers, and even UX designers is being reduced to like information flow, but you only really do half of what normally encompasses UX design, right? So I think we've seen a big reduction in the responsibility of designers in the last 10 years, and I think at the detriment of the software we're building. I think we need to reverse that evolution, right? So I think it's about giving people the opportunity to come back, right? And allowing designers back at the table, listening to them more. Like, there's an expertise there that's invaluable to building great software. So designers should absolutely have a seat at the table, just alongside everyone else. And I think that development that's happened the last couple of years is unfortunate, and that's something we can change, which would help everyone.
It does remind me of a time when I worked at agencies, and I worked with a particular designer who couldn't see past the flat designs, like the kind of brochure-like design in Figma. And every time I was given a design from that person and had to put it onto the web, I had a bajillion questions, like, how does this work? How does that work? Like, I can't make that work like that because it's not print. And I think you're right in that bringing designers into that same process actually frees them from the oppression of flat designs and working like that, actually. But I mean, it brings me more onto more of a... talking of oppression and how things are being kept from people, because you talked about, something being kept from a class of people, now they can finally access it. There's a bigger issue here at play, I think. Did a bit of data research, and according to a report from Data Reportal as of April 2025, only 68.7% of the world's total population have access to the internet. Now, this number is rising year on year, but I do want to give you a couple of quotes from the report. Increases in global internet access mean that the number of people who remain unconnected to the internet has fallen to 2.57 billion, with the majority of these people living in Southern and Eastern Asia and in Africa. However, these figures show that there are still plenty more work to do before the world reaches the goal of universal access, and the quality of people's internet access remains an important consideration too. So, when we're talking about technology being political, democratization, surely there's a bigger issue in terms of social equality when we're talking about technology that we need to solve for. that we potentially actually need to democratize. Something is being kept from people, the internet, and without access to the internet, how can actually people begin to learn what's out there? So surely, potentially, if you can create easier access to these tools, if you can lower the bar, not necessarily dumb things down, but quote, democratize things, surely that's a good thing. As people start getting online without having to invest all that time, then they can get up to speed more quickly. What's your take?
No, I think actually, I mean, I don't know if that should be always the driver for your technology. I think it is fundamentally a good thing that there are easily accessible tools that sets a baseline out there. I think the only problem is that we hail them as being a replacement of more complicated tools, which they're not, right? They're in addition to that. There is a simple tool for doing simple tasks, and if you're doing something more complicated, you do need more experience. In the terms of democratization or equality, if you want to do it, I think it will almost certainly be a step in the wrong direction. Because, well, there's a couple of reasons. Like if we're looking at no-code tools, the effect is usually that what you end up doing is you're trading user experience for developer experience, right? It's very easy for developers to come in and use these drag and drop tools and get started. But the result is normally a much slower website that is a lot heavier to load and usually with quite bad accessibility. So in terms of who can actually access the software you build, that goes down. So I think if we want more people accessing the internet, one thing we can do as developers is we can make sure our websites are accessible. We can make sure our websites are performance and they're as lightweight as we can make them. So people in areas where internet is a lot more costly than it is in the West actually still can load your website. And that's one side. I think maybe even the more important thing is that a lot of people from countries that are sort of getting into the digital space, I mean, they're not stupid, right? They just lacked opportunity. So if we say, hey, technology is now all we need, we only care about the baseline, the tool can do everything. Well, that's actually not great for them. Where right now they're getting into the job market. We're seeing people from a lot of different countries now becoming both designers and developers and starting to make a living like that, actually starting to change their own financial situation. So if we dumb it all down, if we create a baseline of this is good enough and we don't ever care about more than that, and we just want to go as far as the tools can take us and no further, well, then we're actually denying them a lot of the opportunities they otherwise would have had. So no, I think for democratization, it's not a good thing. Like for any sort of social improvement, it's definitely a step in the wrong direction.
100%. Yeah, I think there is a misconception when you let everyone do everything by making it easy to do the thing. There's one single model that people have built that this is the way it should be. And then you can't affect change that way. And I think that goes back to that part of your blog post where you talk about how moving from good and free to controlled by a single company is not the way to go, because then that single company has the complete monopoly over how the world progresses or does not progress as a result of that.
And they will exercise it if history has been any indication.
They will, and they are.
It's important to say, like, easy is good, right? Everything should be exactly as easy as the problem you're trying to solve. Right? We don't want anything to be more complicated than it has to be for the sake of it. There's nobody wins in that scenario. But there's a point where we start simplifying past the point where you aren't actually solving the problem as well anymore, right? Once you start oversimplifying, that's when we start having a problem. And that is what these new generation of tools do, right? They remove some of the important decisions from the user because they deem it to be too complex for them to understand.
And you know what? I've seen that in discussions with us, as we're building Nordcraft, there's always that kind of trade-off between what decision do we make for the user to make it easy for them to solve their problem, and what decisions do we force them to make because they are good decisions to learn how to make. And that comes quite evident with the new HTML element catalog, for example. As in before, we were just showing them a few types of HTML elements and then allowing them to change it in the attribute panel. But actually, if you provide them with all the options, because they do have the ability to make that decision in order to choose the correct HTML element for their use case, then, why would you force them into a hole with that? And why would you limit them and make it simpler and easier? Like, some of these problems are not easy and you need to actually learn how to solve them.
That's the key, right? And when you make it, if you oversimplify it for the developer, you end up just pushing that problem down to the end user, right? And that's not what any of us want.
True. Very good. Okay, I completely agree. Moving on to the next section of the blog post about taste. You say in the blog post, you are not born with taste, and that people who aren't creative don't have it, or at the very least, lack the ability to express it. Tell me more about how this is at odds with anyone being able to do more with these, quote, democratized software and tools.
I think this was probably the most controversial part. I think a lot of people have this idea that what is hard about software development is like just the language. You have to figure out a programming language. But if you speak the programming language, then it's easy, right? If you know how to use a design tool, then suddenly you're a designer because you have good taste, right? But the reality is that, like, in terms of design, taste is something you developed over a long time. And I'm not talking about the ability to look at two designs and say, which one of them do you think looks nicer? Because anyone can do that. Otherwise, the very concept of taste would really exist, right? If it was 100% subjective, we wouldn't talk about it because it wouldn't mean anything. But I'm talking about the ability to understand what is not working in design and what needs to change. And that ability to see that, understand why something is good and why it is bad, that is what requires experience, right? And it doesn't matter what tool you use. It doesn't matter if you're drawing things with a pencil or you're using Figma or Canva, any of these tools, that skill set is the same, and it only comes with experience, right? We have this weird idea often where we say designers are talented and engineers are very knowledgeable, right? And skillful or experienced, right? And it's complete nonsense. Both of those two are skills that require experience, right? The biggest difference is that design is something that people often start at age 2. You start drawing, you start working with colors, you start working with all these things. So you build up a lot more experience in design than you do in software development. Some of the skills are still developed early for a software developer, a lot of logic thinking, etc. But just because people can get those kind of skills from many different places, we kind of assume, or at least some of them, it's often referred to as talent. The reality is both are trained, both take experience, both take years of work to get really, really good at, decades to master. There is no shortcut. It takes that time. We can make things a little bit easier. We can make tools a little bit better, and we can use AI to simplify a lot of things that was really cumbersome before and we don't need to do anymore. But none of those are at the core of what is good design or good software. That is still very much a human thing. It's still very much something that takes a ton of experience. If you think you have good taste, but you just don't know how to design, well, I hate to break it to you, but then you actually probably don't have good taste. Those are the same thing.
Hot takes. You briefly mentioned AI, so I do have a question that kind of brings that in. In the blog post, you say, if you are curious about design, software development, or any other creative profession, by all means, start with one of these simplified tools. Once you find the thing that you're passionate about, upgrade your tools and invest the time it takes to master them, as you were recently just talking about as well. The problem is, and this extends to the widespread use of AI that promises to improve our productivity, and the data has found it doesn't really improve your productivity. Read my blog post on that. I will link it in the description. We are constantly asked to do more as a collective, as an industry, as human beings. Do more quickly. Generate value for the shareholders. So what are people supposed to do when what is being asked of them widely is at odds with what the right thing to do is? How can people justify investing the time when what they're usually being measured on, in this industry at least, is number of tasks achieved in any given day or week?
Well, that's sort of the very core, I think, of what it means to be a professional. I think as a software developer, I never saw it as my job to create code or generate code. I never saw that. I always saw it as I solve problems. I worked for many people that did not see my job as that, not for very long at a time. But that didn't change how I saw myself. So if people ask you to do things faster, it is still your job as an engineer to find the best way of solving the problem at hand for the person asking you to do that. That is not always doing exactly what they ask. It's doing what is your best estimate of what adds value, because they hire you for your expertise, right? And I think I like the classic example that always comes up in with software engineers is like, but management won't allow us time to write tests. And if you ask management to give you time to write tests, then you have failed as a software engineer. That is on you. It is your job to make sure that the work you do is tested. And it is not something, you do not ever ask permission to do your job well. Now, that may put you in conflict with the current team. That might ruffle some feathers. And whether you want to do that, that is up to you. But I would always recommend doing it. Like, don't ever fall into the trap of thinking that these very engineering specific questions that well within your domain is something that management needs to decide, because it's not. And you should never ask them. Don't ask permission to do your job well. And I think the same is true as a designer, right? And in that means, it doesn't just mean, testing, as I mentioned. It can also mean exploring better opportunities or better options or different ways of doing something, right? No, your employer, if you're not lucky enough to be in a situation where this is true, your employer is probably not paying you to educate yourself or learn. So you might have to do some of that on your own time to progress in your career, right? But you absolutely should invest in that. You should absolutely invest time doing that. That's how you progress in that career.
You're absolutely right. And, I see a lot of people say the same things regarding testing as in accessibility. Oh, we didn't have time or budget to make our website accessible. Management wanted to get the project out at this deadline, and to make the app accessible would have taken us over the deadline. But, surely that's just an estimation error, right? You factor that into your job as you do it. And I mean, I've been in that situation before, right? And I think it's a way you sell you shouldn't really have to sell your job to management, because they hired you to do your job. But it's the things you talk about, like you said, you're doing your job wrong if you say, can I have some time in the budget to write some tests? Like, that's a given, right? Isn't it? And accessibility is a given if you're doing your job correctly.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you have a family and you're trying to pack the boot of your car. We'll say it in British English for Selma's sake.
Thank you.
You realize that, because I don't own a car, but I rent a bunch of cars for different things. So they all have different boot sizes. And I realized that nothing is more irrelevant than the size of your boot. Boot is trunk for Americans, by the way, just in case it's not all.
Thanks for clearing that up.
Because no matter what size it is, you have like one more thing than fits in. Like there's no possible way. If you bought a semi truck, somehow you would fill it with stuff when going on a weekend trip if you have kids. Like there's no exceptions to the rule. And you realize that the solution is not to get more space. And the same thing is true for software development. Whatever your timeline is, you can say, we don't have time to do this. We don't have time to do this. We've only ever improved productivity in the last 30, 40 years of software development, right? We've gotten so much faster. We can build so much faster. And 40 years ago, the engineers didn't have time to write tests. Today, they don't have time to do testing. Nothing has changed. And if we get 10 times faster and more efficient, it still won't change, because people are still going to want it more faster is the English word for that. It's not going to change. So you have to make a call. It's a priority. Do you think it's important? If it's important, then you do it. For accessibility, I would say that is a decision you make as an individual contributor on that team. Ideally, you have a conversation with everyone else so you're in agreement, but you choose whether the stuff you build is accessible. You choose whether it's well tested. You choose whether it's functional and works the way it should. That is on you, right? Nobody else makes that call. That's what we're asked to do.
And we know that these tools that claim to make things more accessible, to build things faster, like they don't really work. They don't work. You end up getting a whole host of things that you need to fix. You know, AI can't produce accessible apps to save its life. And I recently attended a talk by Leonie Watson at Pixel Pioneers in Bristol, and Leonie asked ChatGPT for some kind of submit button, an accessible button, basically, and it got it like so wrong. It's so wrong. You need to go and watch that talk. It's like the wrongest thing you've ever seen, but it's so confident in its wrongness as well. And when we're under that time pressure, and when we're using these simplified tools that make it look so magic and easy, we can get complacent. And then we end up being worse at our jobs, I think.
I think the trick with AI is actually like shockingly simple. It can be an incredible tool, but never ask it to do anything you couldn't do yourself. Mm-hmm. And it's really that simple. Like don't ever do that. If you can't verify what it's done, if you don't understand the output, don't use it. Right? I mean, and that doesn't mean that you couldn't, like, it can generate images you probably couldn't make yourself, right? Fair enough. But in terms of text, content, expertise, just don't rely on it for something. Use it to make you more efficient and faster, however you can. That's fine. But it's still, you are still the person who's responsible at the end. You still need to be able to verify everything that you're producing, even if you're producing with AI.
And I would also argue that why ask an AI to generate an image when you can ask your favorite local artist or designer to do it for you, because that is the right thing to do. Last question. You end the article with an inspiring thought. Having to invest time in learning new skills is not oppression. It is what brings you freedom. What advice or thoughts do you have for people who don't have much available time because of pressures that we've talked about before, and not just pressures in the workplace, but people already under pressure to deliver at work, or perhaps working parents, people with caring responsibilities, people with disabilities, people not in a position to invest that time. Maybe they're working 3 jobs, 4 jobs. We know what this world is like right now. Learning stuff, mastering stuff takes time, but sometimes it feels hopeless. What advice do you have?
Yeah, it absolutely does, and it can be difficult, right? It's one of the biggest privileges you can have is time, and again, you realize that as a parent, that realize all of a sudden your pastime, most of your free time is gone, right? But even more so if you're struggling and have to work multiple jobs, right? Like I don't have a magical solution to that. I think one of what I was aiming for with the comment here is really saying that if you can make that work, right? However it is, right? It doesn't have to be spending like 80 hours a week learning new things, right? That's not how it works. It can be whatever time you can find, however you can make it work, right? But the difference is we live in a world where technology is getting better and it can do more and more. And AI can't build fantastic, beautiful applications, but it can do some of that work, right? It creates a baseline. And I think if you're never going to get past that baseline of what the technology itself can do, it's going to get harder and harder to get a good job, right? So if you want a career, if you want to stay relevant on the job market, I think the only way of doing that is to make sure that you have a skill set that's always significantly above what the technology can do for you, right? If all you ever do is ask AI models to do stuff, you are the easiest person in the world to replace, right? Like there is no job security, there is no future in that role, right? And ironically, a lot of the jobs that people are claiming AI is going to replace are actually really good jobs. Like it absolutely makes sense to learn programming. It absolutely makes sense to learn design, software engineering, all these roles. They're every bit as relevant now as they were before. But I think you can't really be mediocre, right? You do have to invest time. You do have to make sure you progress. You do have to make sure you take it serious as a craft. Because again, if you only ever meet that baseline of what an AI can do, then your employer will eventually figure out that there's a cheaper way of getting what they want.
If we're moving on to the career advice, there are hundreds and thousands of applications per position these days, probably with AI generated CVs. It's not going to stand out, is it? And I think it brings up a case for putting your personality through into what you do. And your personality is shaped by how you solve problems, what you're really good at, what you've taken the time to learn about and to master as well. And that's going to set you ahead. And there are no shortcuts. You know, we see people all the time, don't we? We see people day in, day out, trying to get to the best possible solution in the shortest time. But the best possible solution in the shortest time is not really good enough, I don't think. And these tools can help us get somewhere, baseline, but they're not going to make us shine, are they? Really? No.
Shortcuts make for long delays.
Shortcuts make for long delays. Let's you could put that on your board behind you. Now you've removed what used to be there.
Yeah.
Inspiring. Well, thank you so much, Andreas, for joining me and talking about your new blog post. We can leave the link in the description. Stop saying democratize when you mean dumb down. Go give it a read. Go share it with your network and let us know what you think in the comments. And I guess we'll see you next time on another random video that we decide to record because we can.
That was excellent.